Alright, we're gonna do something that I've probably done far too many times. We're gonna talk about a horror movie that nobody gives a shit about. Now, usually when I review movies on this channel, I usually review films that are well respected, that are of high quality, that, films that critics love. Films that end up on, like, the top 10 best films of the year, or of all time type of lists. But I'm a human being, and I'm also not even in my 20s yet, so at a certain point, I kind of get sick of these quality films too, so usually I just kind of veer into a direction of watching either absolute trash or some stuff that I don't really need to think deeply about. And the genre that I go for are honestly horror movies, because I've mentioned this before. And if you haven't seen the other videos that I have mentioned this before, because I usually mention this when I review really obscure horror movies, my first love were horror movies when it comes to movies in general. Like, I was so obsessed with watching every single classic that that at this point I've basically seen all the classic movies that you can probably name. Name any of them. Name 100 of them. I've probably seen all of them, like, within the first 3 years of me getting into movies. And Alice Sweet Alice was one of the movies that I've heard about a lot, usually on the internet. It's got this cult following, and I never really got a chance to watch it, or mostly because it's kind of a hard movie to find. I mean, obviously it's on YouTube, but I kind of want to watch it on TV, and, I don't have the necessary equipment to kind of connect my computer to the TV, but I finally got to see it because I found a file for it. It's not that good. It's not that good, but let's get into the positives first. The film is really good at using, like, really creepy religious imagery, which isn't really special, but here, because the movie's so fucking empty, it actually kind of stands out. It also has a really ballsy beginning for, like, even compared to most horror movies, like, right off the bat, because this film is part of the early movement of slasher films. Before Friday the 13th kind of made the whole thing more mainstream, you had films like Alice Sweet Alice, or Halloween, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, kind of, paving the ground for what was going to be overly exploited in the 80s. And usually, in these slasher films, the first person to die is either a teenager who just has sex, or a black guy. Which is not real. I'm not sure if that's a racist thing. It just so happens to be so. And in this movie, unlike those films, unlike those predictable bullshit movies, they kill a little girl. Not only do they kill a little girl, they kill Brooke Shields in this movie. They kill Brooke Shields, and not only do they fucking kill the little girl by choking her to death, they burn her body. And I was kind of blown away by it, because I've never seen a slasher film start out like this. It's such a huge deal, man. Like, how can you top this? How can you possibly top killing a little girl, then burning her body in a church? In a fucking church! Yeah, it's got that great beginning. The cinematography is... It's got this immediacy in the horror scenes where the killer is actually running around, and because it has this immediacy, it adds a sense of movement, and because it adds a sense of movement, it builds more tension. And I just gotta say this: directing wise, the film is done well. It's really the script that's the problem. And some of the more early modern aesthetics of horror movies are used well in this film, like the creepy masks, which will be exploited throughout the 80s, and then you got, like, the children singing in a dreamy, hazy way in the background, kind of, bringing this eerie mood to the whole thing. And then the film's really good using blood, and just the color red. It emphasizes what really is just minor gore. Like, people get stabbed, and, you don't see, like, intestines or anything. Like, people bleed, but people bleed in all kinds of other movies that are not horror films. So, here, the gore is very minor. It's barely gore, but the way they use it, the way they frame it, the way they set it, it makes it so much more disturbing. And the best example is this one scene where the killer with the mask, stabs this woman, and the woman starts screaming, and the woman's stabbed in the leg so she doesn't die. So she crawls outside, and it's raining outside, and as she goes out, and the blood kind of washes out onto the pavement because of the rain, and she's kind of sitting there screaming and crying in this in a circle of pavement that's soaked with blood. And the way it's set, the way the color just kind of the way it lights up on the pavement actually makes this whole thing seem much more violent, and it becomes a much more effective scene overall. And that's about it when it comes to the good things about the movie. And I am going to shit on this movie from now on. The acting is terrible. Even for a horror film, the acting is so bad. It's not even cheesy, It's the best way I could describe it is that it's kind of soap opera acting, It's kind of beyond being cheesy. It's so beyond being cheesy that it eventually kind of feels cheap. It feels so fake and plastic. Every single line delivery just feels off. You have this feeling that they're acting. You're never convinced that they're actual people. They're actors reading a script. It's so obvious. It's also got this really manipulative and over-the-top beginning that doesn't really fit the rest of the movie. So, because in the beginning, this mother's really she kind of prefers the Brooke Shields' daughter, and she doesn't really care about Alice, the older daughter. But the second the Brooke Shields' daughter dies, she's suddenly, filled with love and caring for this Alice girl. And, suddenly it doesn't fit the movie at all. It fits the rest of the movie. That sense of caring for Alice does fit the rest of the movie. But then you realize the beginning of the film doesn't fit with the rest of the movie at all. And then you got this really forced scene where they're trying to establish a romance between the mother and the father who left the family, and it's totally unneeded because, spoiler alert, the father fucking dies like 10 minutes after that scene, so it's completely pointless, and the film flows at a snail's pace. If there's anything that I expect from a cult horror film from the 70s and the 80s, it's a pace that I can enjoy. When I watch a movie like April Fool's Day, or Society, or even something as terrible as Killer Clowns from Outer Space, I expect a pace that's quick, that's simple, that's to the point. But this film actually tries to build atmosphere, and it completely fails because the whole film does feel very cheap, and the acting's just not there for the atmosphere buildup. So, thankfully, the film does kind of become more interesting 40 minutes into the movie. So the first 40 minutes, outside of a few scenes here and there, it's just a complete wasteland of entertainment. But with it, as we get into the 40-minute mark, this sense of mystery starts to build, so you actually get interested. By the 70-minute mark, so the hour and 10-minute mark, the killer is revealed. And the film actually keeps going because it's actually 106 minutes long, and eventually they actually get to a point where they start addressing this underlying theme. So this killer is kind of driven to kill people because of religious guilt, or at least she kind of thinks she's the savior. So she kills these people, but then she's kind of filled with religious guilt, and the cycle just keeps going on. And you think they do something with this, because it is an interesting idea for a cult movie to deal with, because that's a pretty deep thing. Religious guilt is something that fucking Ingmar Bergman talks about. But no, again, they simply, they present the theme, they propose the theme, and they do nothing with it. They just throw it out the window because, you know what? We gotta kill more people. There's gotta be more body count in this goddamn film, and it's nothing. The film's not that good. It's not good. I was very... And if you know anything about my horror movie reviews, you know that I don't mind cult horror films. I gave Society a very positive review. I gave April Fool's Day, this really cheap movie from the 80s starring Biff from fucking Back to the Future with a stupid goddamn twist at the end. I gave that movie a raving review because those movies knew exactly what they were doing. Alice Sweet Alice is trying to be something much deeper. It's trying to be, like, filmmaking-wise, it's trying to have that sophistication that The Exorcist had, or Rosemary's Baby had, but the acting is not on par with the ambition of the director. So, the film kind of falls flat because it just kind of falters this awkward line. So yeah, that was the review. If you want to see it, why not? Just watch it, I guess. I don't control. I'm not Anthony Fantano. I'm not that powerful of a critic. And hey, if you disagree with me, write something in the comments. That's usually what happens. So yeah, Alice Sweet Alice. Didn't really like it, but bye.